Welcome to Classical Theology. I'm so excited to have a friend of mine, Ken Samples, with us today. We're going to talk about a book that he wrote a few years ago called Classic Christian Thinkers. And he has a number of really interesting folks in here that we're going to cover throughout this show, not this episode now, but I want to have him on just to kind of explain to us what the book's about, why he did it. And I want to take some episodes to go through the book. And because I think this is what this channel is all about, is about learning about classical theology and the thinkers through church history. So I'm thrilled to have Ken on the show. So thank you, sir, for being here. Just tell us about what you do at RTB. He's a full-time scholar at Reasons to Believe, where I'm privileged to be a visiting scholar. And I got to meet Ken in person last summer. So why don't you tell us about what you do over there and what you're working on?
Well, good to have you. Pleasure to be with you today, Brian. I appreciate your ministry very much. I am a senior staff scholar at Reasons to Believe. I think I'm working on my 27th year, so it's been quite a lengthy term here. My background is in theology and philosophy, and the latest project I was working on is a book entitled Clear Thinking in a Messy World that looks at logic and reason and cognitive biases. So that hopefully will be out sometime a bit later in the year. And I have a podcast and write a lot of blogs and enjoy spending time with our visiting scholars. And it was a real pleasure to have you recently.
It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed getting out there and seeing the organization and meeting people in person. You guys are really doing a lot of really cool things out there. You got a really great team and facilities, and you are just doing a lot of amazing stuff, and from such an interesting point of view as well.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
And your book on logic looks really amazing. I was able to endorse it for Ken and look through it and read through it a little bit, and I'm excited for it to come out. When does it come out?
I think it is planned for the fall of 24, although if all of the things work out, we might see it in the summer. So we're still waiting. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. It's really good. I'm looking forward to being able to share it with people, because critical thinking is something that we need to beef up in the church a little bit, and as Christians and people in general. It's not taught in schools like it used to be, and I think it should be. So yeah, I appreciate you highlighting that for us. So what made you want to write this book? This book came out, I think it was 2019 I saw. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's correct.
What made you want to write, why this book, and then why the people in the book? So what was the motivation for the book, and then how did you maybe get the list of people you wanted to have in here?
Well, working at Reasons to Believe, I have always wanted to expose our followers to more of historic classical Christian theology. From my vantage point of studying philosophy and theology, a lot of people who are initially interested in science sometimes don't know a lot about the philosophy or the history of the faith. And I've always had a passion for historic Christianity. Certainly, I have a personal relationship with God, but Christianity is a broad movement over, 2,000 years. And so I wrote a series of articles, kind of, everything you wanted to know about St. Augustine or St. Thomas Aquinas or Martin Luther. And a number of people looked at the articles and they said, hey, you ought to put that into a book.
Okay.
And so it kind of developed that way. The people that I have in the book, there are 9 scholars. I've got 3 church fathers, Irenaeus, Athanasius, and Augustine. Then 2 great medieval Christian thinkers, Anselm and Thomas Aquinas. I have 2 Protestant thinkers, Luther and John Calvin. And then Blaise Pascal kind of fits in the science revolution of the 17th century. Mm-hmm. And my last one is C.S. Lewis. I appreciate your question. Why did I pick who I did? Well, there were some I wanted to include. I wish I could have included a discussion of the Cappadocian Fathers.
Oh, okay.
Gregory of Nazianzus, etc. I also wanted to maybe include Jonathan Edwards, but I just ran out of time and ran out of space. I would say the reason I chose the individuals I did was a couple reasons. One, I wanted to kind of give a broad spectrum of thinkers. So you've got church fathers, You've got people in the Middle Ages, the Reformation, and up until C.S. Lewis. But these were also individuals that, in my mind, made contributions to theology, philosophy, and apologetics. So, some obviously have more contributions in the field of philosophy and apologetic than others,
Mhm.
but I thought all of them had points that were really well worth reaching through. I also thought that so many of these thinkers, even though some may be more closely associated with Orthodoxy or Catholicism or Protestantism, I thought all of them, to some degree anyway, made a contribution to mere Christianity. And
Yeah.
then I would say another reason is these are some of my favorites. I mean, these individuals, though they lived long ago, they've encouraged me, Brian. Sometimes when you're an intellectual, you're a cerebral person, you're bookish, it's nice to have a relationship with those types of people in the past who kind of encourage you. So, those are some of the things that went into my selection of the individuals.
Okay. So when you say mere Christianity, tell us what you mean by that. How does that relate to these folks?
Yeah, I'm really using the term there the way C.S. Lewis did,
Okay.
that there is a mere Christianity. It's kind of a creedal Christianity, what you see in the Apostles' Creed, what you see in the Nicene Creed. It's the broad area of agreement between the branches of Christendom. And so it would involve the Trinity, the incarnation, the atonement, the resurrection, the second coming. Obviously there are issues in which Protestants and Catholics and Orthodox have very vigorous disagreements, like
Right.
the Bible and tradition or salvation by grace through faith. But I'm really talking about a classical Christianity that's reflected in the creeds.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And those folks that you mentioned, they should be under, and those issues should be studied by Protestants and Catholics
Yeah,
alike, as you mentioned. So it's something that we should have. I've noticed. I've been on 4 church staffs. I've been in church my whole life. There's just been a real. I think this is a general statement. Of course, there are churches that are going to prove this wrong, but there are, I think, a general lack of awareness in teaching from pastors or Sunday school teachers and that kind of thing. And I understand pastors are busy. There's a lot of things that pastors are expected to do. They can't do everything. But it's sad and disappointing. One reason I want to have this channel is for people who want to get more than they're getting out of church, but not go to seminary or Bible college.
sure.
Um, so we lament, I guess, the lack of teaching in the church on not only these people, but those very doctrines that you mentioned. A lot of
Yeah,
folks can't very well articulate the Trinity or the incarnation. I had to fill in for a pastor a number of years ago, and he called me on a Saturday and said, "Hey, I'm sick and you need to preach tomorrow." So they were having a communion service. So I just spoke on communion, and I gave the Matthean view of the Last Supper, and so here's a Catholic view of communion. Here's the Eucharist. Here's the Lutheran view.
yeah,
All these different views, and here's our view, kind of the Baptist Anglican view, and here's why we hold to it. And there were people who in the church who came to me afterwards who were in their probably 70s and said, I've never heard that before. And it's just really basic
yeah.
stuff. So why do you think that is? Why do you think it is in the church that we've kind of lost this historical connection? Another one thing that I lament as a general kind of Protestant evangelical that I like about higher churches, whether it's Anglican Catholics or Presbyterians in some respects or whatever, they have a little bit more of a connection, I think, with the historical church, the creeds, a little bit more of awareness. Why do you think that we've lost that? Any ideas there?
Yeah, you know, uh, as an evangelical who has interacted with evangelicals for a long time, I think a lot of time people think that theology almost is exclusively just kind of Bible study. Now,
Right.
don't get me wrong, Bible study is very, very important, and
Sure.
I affirm Scripture as the supreme authority. But I think sometimes people lose awareness that the study of theology also involves historical theology. So
Hmm.
what were some of the theological ideas through the centuries? Philosophical theology. I mean, when you think about the Trinity, one what and three whos, I mean, you're talking metaphysics, you're talking personhood. And I think as well, there is, unfortunately, in our time, a lack of awareness for history itself. I mean, who
Oh, good point. Yeah.
who are the critical people that are so very important? And you know, I wrote the book because I wanted evangelicals to maybe read Thomas Aquinas, or maybe read the Confessions of Augustine, or
Right.
pick up the Pensées by Pascal. And you know, I think these other traditions, like the Catholic, Orthodox, the Anglican tradition, there's a lot of richness there.
There
We
is.
might,
Yeah, there is.
yeah, we might differ with them on various issues, but
Hmm.
I've always liked liturgy. I've always liked creeds. I've always, you know, I was fascinated the first time I understood who Athanasius was and what role he played. I thought, wow, he's a hero of mine. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I've been in a lot of different churches. I started off going to a very liberal when I was a child, a very liberal PC USA Presbyterian church, and then went to Assembly of God church, and then a church. I'm sorry, Assembly of God church. Then Church of God. I went to Lee University, and then went to Southern Evangelical Seminary, and started going to more Baptist churches. So I've seen a lot of different, different denominations and things, and so I see that. I see what you're saying about some denominations for whatever reason being more plugged in to that. I think there's some aversion to Protestants too, that they think, well, if we start going outside the Bible or going more into reading people like Aquinas or Augustine, maybe, we're getting a little bit too outside of our box, and thinking they're getting into dangerous water because they're Catholic or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, I think sometimes sola scriptura is misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of the Bible being the supreme final authority on all matters regarding, you know, life and doctrine, some people think, well, it's only the Bible, or the
Right.
Bible
Yeah.
with nothing else added. And
Right. Right.
that's I encounter that some on social media, and that's one of the things I wanted to address in Classic Christian Thinkers.
Oh, good, good. Okay, yeah, yeah. I see that a lot too. Almost this aversion of, well, if we're using reason, we're submitting the Bible and even God to reason, making reason kind of above God. Which
Yeah.
I don't think we want to say it's above God, but it's a prerequisite to understanding anything, even be able to understand theology and to be able to read the Bible, that kind of thing like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some, if people were to read your book and to read the folks you have in here, what what do you think would be some of the main goals of that? How would that affect us in terms of just a normal church going Christian? They're going to read your book. They're going to read about all these fathers and medievals and reformers, and so what should we expect to gain? We read it, and then what?
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of challenges today. There are competing worldviews out there. Postmodern thinking with its deep relativism of
Hmm.
truth and morality. You know, Islam is a vibrant religion in many various parts of the world. What I hope people would get out of reading this book is that there were great Christian thinkers in the past, and they battled issues like this. Irenaeus ran up against Gnosticism, a very
Hmm.
powerful heretical thinking. Athanasius had to battle maybe the church's greatest controversy, Arianism, that
Hmm.
you know Jesus was a created being. So what I'm after here is to let people appreciate that we have a lot of benefits from the past. Christianity is a historical faith. I mean, in my personal view, I think maybe the greatest Christian thinkers have already lived and died. I mean, the church is very fortunate to have many fine Christian thinkers, you and your colleagues at Southern Evangelical Seminary included in that. But when you look at somebody like Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine, or you know, somebody like Blaise Pascal, it's amazing how bright, how sharp, how thoughtful they are. I really am hoping that if somebody read my book, they might say, you know what, I feel I feel confident enough. I'm going to pick up the Confessions.
Oh,
This
okay.
this has
Yeah.
been a classic
Hmm.
book. Maybe I'll make my way through it, or maybe if I'm even braver, I'll pick up the Summa Theologiae and wade a little bit into the writings of Thomas, or you know, people who maybe have never been exposed to Luther. I mean, I think Luther's story of struggling with to find acceptance with God, I think that's something every Christian should read through. So, I'm hoping that they'll read Lewis, they'll read The Problem of Pain, or they'll read Mere Christianity, which was a book that really hooked me toward the faith.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Using this as kind of a launching pad or conduit to the other books as well.
Yeah.
That's really important, and I think it makes our faith and our understanding of scriptures, God, theology in general, and just like you said, everyday life. And these thinkers are not, people see Christianity maybe or even theology as kind of irrelevant to real life. And if you take the view that our faith should impact every area of our life, then reading these folks you have in here will show that there's a lot of really practical, relevant issues that are both theological but also practical, because our theology, as Norm Geisler used to say, is our views of God is the most important view we can have because it affects everything else that we believe. So, what do you think are some of the issues that they were struggling with that we see today in terms of maybe doctrine or anything for that matter?
Yeah.
But I'm thinking doctrine, maybe cultural as well, but doctrinal in particular.
Yeah, very good. Well, certainly the heresies never go away. I mean, when Jehovah's Witnesses knock at your door, I
Right.
often ask them, have you ever read Arius of Alexandria? You'd like him. His views are similar to yours.
Right.
And so many of these challenges that we have today, I mean, there were times in the past where people had relativistic views. They approached things from a very subjective point of view. I think there's just so much to learn about basic Christian doctrine. I mean, thinking of Athanasius's defense of the deity of Christ, looking at St. Augustine's discussion of the doctrine of the Trinity, and then engaging, Anselm, that the ontological argument, whether you agree with it or not, that it came out of his own personal devotion. He was
That's interesting, isn't it?
reading,
Yeah.
yeah, that here's this argument that has challenged and perplexed people for, almost 1,000 years.
That's right. Yeah, people still debate it today,
Yeah,
Christians
and
included.
exactly right. And then, looking at some of the unique philosophical ideas of Saint Augustine, and again, it's hard to imagine a brighter mind, a more devoted philosophical mind. And I came across a quote from Thomas recently where he said, it's part of my calling from God to understand and to defend the historic Christian faith. And I thought, wow, so many of us have benefited from his personal devotion to that.
Yeah.
And,
Mhm.
C.S. Lewis, his book, The Abolition of Man, I think he saw a lot of what we see today coming in terms of, subjectivism, relativism, and things of that nature. So I try to include various parts or issues that I think, when I have my chapter on John Calvin, I talk about the sensus divinitatis that
Okay.
Calvin thought
Mhm.
people have an awareness of God. When I look at Pascal, I talk about Pascal's view of human beings, where he says humans are an enigma of greatness and wretchedness. And I thought, wow, greatness, the imago Dei, wretchedness, the fall.
Right.
So there is so much, I think, that can help us. And I also talk about the warts and all. I mean, these are human beings. All of us are influenced by sin. All of these thinkers made mistakes, and yet God's grace, they retained the grace of God. So I try to also talk about that all of us need encouragement and support. And sometimes you can get it by reading the past.
Yeah, that's right. There's everyone likes to claim Augustine. The Catholics like to claim him.
Yep.
He was Catholic. When you read the Reformers and people today, they want to claim he was maybe more Protestant. Do you think on a spectrum, would he be more considered Protestant or Catholic, or what do you think about that?
It's a great question, and it's an issue that's been brought to me. I have many Catholic scholars who are friends, and we dialogue back and forth. I thought it's always been interesting, Brian, that there have been a number of scholars who have said that the Reformation is kind of a dissidence within the mind of Augustine. That Augustine's view of the church that came out of the Donatist controversy, had a high view of the universal church and its authority. But out of the Pelagian controversy came his view of grace. And so people like Benjamin Warfield and even contemporary thinkers today have
Uh-huh.
said maybe the Reformation is a debate in the mind of St. Augustine. I personally think, and I think that this is correct, at least it's correct in my experience, I think Augustine may have influenced Protestants nearly as much as he had Roman Catholics.
Yeah,
And
I'd agree with that.
that's what I want to encourage my evangelical friends and say, look, here is church history, here are these heavyweight thinkers. They're also accessible to us. You know, they don't belong exclusively to the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church. This is our history too.
Right, right. Well, I think I know your answer on this next question, but if you had to take, I'm assuming you put your favorite theologian in this book. I'm guessing you didn't leave them out of the book. Who would you say is either your favorite theologian, and then maybe, if it's different, the greatest in some sense,
Yeah.
and why?
And given this company, I mean, there are 9 of them, so I almost felt like a manager filling out a lineup of my 9 favorite, Christian thinkers. Outside of scripture, I often talk about 3 individuals, and it's very difficult to narrow them down. But I
Sure.
love Augustine, Pascal, and C.S. Lewis. I
Okay.
love the idea that we're made for God, that anything other than God will not bring us satisfaction. So if I had to kind of narrow it down, I think it would be Augustine. But
Okay.
I mean, I have real passion for Athanasius. And when I read Aquinas, I'm always amazed, and he quotes so positively about so much of Augustine that it's hard to pick one, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess it would be St. Augustine in the end.
St. Augustine. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Very good. You mentioned that you put folks in here who were really heavy with theology, philosophy, and
Yeah.
apologetics. How do you see, obviously theology, we don't know what theology really is. How do you see philosophy and apologetics being important for us to be aware of, either knowing the history with these folks, and how does it play into our theology today?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that there are some very important arguments for the existence of God. I mean, you find different arguments in Augustine, in Anselm, in
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Aquinas. You have very sophisticated presentations about the nature and attributes about God, which I think are very critical today. In addition, I think just some of the ways of reasoning about the truth of Christianity. I pretty much enjoy C.S. Lewis's kind of cumulative case of arguments and things of that nature. So I think that there's a lot of philosophy that is very valuable. And these things have helped me significantly. I think even just thinking philosophically about the Trinity or thinking philosophically about the incarnation, how could Jesus be a single person with both a divine and human nature?
Right.
I love the discussions that we get from Athanasius. Anselm had a book, Cur Deus Homo, Why the God Man? I love that. And you know, I really do think I'm a very ecumenical person. My natural tendency is to ask, where can we first agree?
Mm-hmm.
And I just find the agreement, the classical agreement about mere Christianity to be so significant that I hope it's not lost in light of our denominational debates. I mean,
Right. Right.
I think those debates are important, but to lose sight of the fact of that rich Trinitarian incarnational theology is, I've just learned so much. I have to say, I had some really good teachers in college, but it's reading some of these great books that have taken me even
Right.
further,
Mm-hmm.
who've challenged me to,
Right.
hey, how do I come to grips with the idea that God has one essence, but is 3 distinct persons?
Yeah, it's been interesting for me as an Air Force chaplain, because I get to work with all different kind of chaplains. I've worked with all kinds of Christians, Jewish chaplains, Muslim chaplains. We have one Buddhist, at least a few years ago we did. I guess he's still, I'm not sure. And then you get to see if you just go to one church all the time, you don't get to see the richness of the Christian faith. And yeah, I would encourage people to go to other churches. You don't have to agree with them, but just to see what they believe and how they understand the faith. Go to Catholic church and go to Presbyterian church, Baptist, and just try to figure out how does everybody believe differently, and what are the core teachings of Christianity that we can't agree on. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
I think important for us to do. I remember going to one of my friends who was a Eastern Orthodox chaplain.
Yeah.
Went to his as we were in chaplain school. Actually, we went to a church around that area, and it was really interesting because I had never been inside of one before. And of course, there are icons everywhere. They used incense. It was just really different. And I asked him, why they did certain things. And he said, well, they try to really get every sense or the five senses involved in worship. And I thought that was really cool because even though I disagree on some things, it's really neat to be able to bring the whole person, with not just hearing the service and seeing it, but smells and touching things and
Yeah.
tying things back into the historic faith. It was really interesting that they could do that, and I think that we could benefit from that more as Protestants to be able to do that.
And I think as our world, our country continues in what I think is an increasingly post-Christian state, whatever differences we may have with our Orthodox friends or our Catholic friends, in many ways we are allies in this, in our values and our
Mm-hmm.
view of the dignity of human beings. And I love what you say, because going to these churches, even as a visitor, just to understand, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
they make contributions that are unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I think C.S. Lewis probably came up with that mere Christianity idea, not necessarily the book, but the idea.
Right.
He came out of Belfast, where there was a lot of hostility between Catholics and Protestants. And I think he wanted to say, hey, we can also be allies.
Yeah, good point. What are do you think some of the debates? Are there any debates that you see from the earliest times? You start with Irenaeus and go forward. Are there any that just kind of go through? What are some of the really biggest ones that you see throughout churches? Are there any some that just really they're always debated and you see them come up all the time? What are some major ones
Yeah.
that you see?
Yeah, well, there are a number of them. Obviously, I think the heresies, Gnosticism, Arianism, Pelagianism, they never completely go away. They kind of come back in various forms. But I think if you have a clear understanding of what they're saying, that's very helpful. But there are issues. I mean, Irenaeus and Athanasius, they do put a strong emphasis on the idea of the authority of the church, that, we received this from the apostles. And
Yeah.
so there is apostolic tradition debate. Then, of course, in my chapter on Luther, I bring out this question of what is the relationship of Scripture to tradition. And Brian, I'll bet this is part of your experience as well. Even though I view Scripture as the supreme authority, church tradition is enormously valuable
sure.
in apologetic contexts.
Yeah.
And so I see some of those tensions. Again, I really strongly encourage people to appreciate the struggle that Luther had. I mean, he became an Augustinian monk. He said, "Hey, I was doing everything the church taught me, but I felt even further away from God." And a quotation I give in the Luther chapter is Benedict XVI said in his presentation to the Lutheran churches in Germany. He said, Luther's question of where do I stand with God? He said, that's still our question today. I thought, wow, if a Catholic thinker like Benedict XVI, Cardinal Ratzinger, as he was before Pope, he recognized that whether you agree with Luther or not, Luther's asking a very critical question. So
Yeah.
I appreciate these dialogues and these debates and these discussions. But in the end, I still think, wow, when I read the Nicene Creed and the Apostles' Creed, that's a pretty big slice of Christianity that we share.
Right. Yeah, it would be nice, I think, if we could incorporate some of the creeds into our own worship services, so people could be aware of just some of the basic teachings.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming on. Ken, I really appreciate you being here and sharing your book with
Yeah.
us. And I'll leave a link. I'll leave a link to the book in the description. But yeah, make sure you grab a copy and read it. His Ken is a great writer and makes everything interesting and fun to read. And this is really important. And that's what this channel is all about. It's about learning about classical theology and historical Christianity. And so we'll spend some time looking at each chapter through classic Christian thinkers. But I want to have Ken on and let's have him introduce the book to us and tell us, what was the reasoning behind it and the motivation for why he brought anybody in that he did. Is there anything else you want to highlight or say, Ken, before we wrap up?
I just want to say how much I appreciate you and where you work at Southern Evangelical Seminary, as well as this podcast. I hope you'll send me a link. I'll make it available to all of my social media contacts. And I appreciate your commitment to doing a program like this. This is a very valuable show to listen to. And I know a lot of people will really learn and grow. So keep up the good work.
Thank you. I appreciate the encouragement. Well, thanks for listening. Go out and buy the book, and we'll keep going through it, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take care.